What's going on, guys? Fuller here with Custom Offsets TV on the YouTube. I think we're gonna start a new series. We're gonna call this one From the Inbox. So I have a list of all the questions that you guys have asked us, and this episode is gonna be on spacers because no matter how many videos we make, how many 5 things videos, how many quick informational videos we pump out there, it seems like you guys always have questions on spacers, so we're gonna dive into this a little further. So before we start, there are 2 common things that people refer to as spacers. Now this is a spacer. It's very thin, as you can see. I think this is like a 5mm spacer. And this is also what people call a spacer, but this is technically an adapter because this has new studs as well. So your truck bolts up here and your new wheel bolts on here, and instead of mounting them to your factory studs, you're putting it on the studs inside the spacers. So we sell Bora spacers on our website. It's T6061 aluminum, aircraft grade aluminum, and then 10.1 steel studs. So these things are strong, they're made to order, and they're also hub centric, so you don't run into any issues with the wheels falling off. If you haven't heard of that, check out our other videos. We kind of explain that a little more. Now, spacers come in a variety of sizes. Obviously, like I said, there's this one that's really thin, and there's this one that's 4 inches, and then there's everything in between. So depending on what size you're ordering, this is about 1 inch, and this one has the new studs put in. This is the same size, but it doesn't have the new studs. So something that people run into a lot of times is they'll message us and ask, what size spacer do I need where I don't have to cut my factory studs? Because if you put this onto your vehicle and your stud sticks through and it just barely comes past, you don't have enough threads on there to put on your lug nut to hold your wheels safely in place. So that's where some people will go ahead and order these that have the new studs. Now, you kind of run into the same problem because your factory stud might stick through here, but if it goes through, now your wheel's not going to bolt up flush to the spacer. So again, you're going to run into some problems. So what you would want to do is measure out, this is 1 inch. So you measure 1 inch on the factory stud and then cut your factory stud so that when you put the nut on to hold the spacer in place, the nut is buried inside this hole. Then that allows you to bolt your wheel up to sit flush onto the spacer, which allows you to drive safely and your wheels won't fall off. So for a general rule of thumb, if you're looking to add spacers to your truck, you're going to want to go at least 1.75 or 2 inches to avoid cutting your studs. This one here is a 2-inch spacer. A lot of times people are adding 2-inch spacers on the rear of their vehicle. Typically kits like Rough Country will tend to push out to the front of your vehicle and increase the track width. But in the rear, since they're just using blocks and not new lift knuckles, that track width isn't affected. So in order to level up the wheels front to back, people are often adding a 2-inch spacer. That's probably the most common size that we sell. So to dive into a couple of these questions then, the first one, do I need Loctite? No, you do not need Loctite on spacers. You simply torque the spacer to your vehicle just like it's a wheel, and then torque the wheel to the spacer just like you would if you're mounting it on the original hub of your vehicle. After about like 100 miles or so, you're going to want to come back and re-torque both the spacer and the wheel to make sure that they're both on there tight. Again, the whole theme throughout this is that if you're going to run spacers, you want to make sure that you're doing it safely so that your wheels don't fall off. Hi, Charlie. Charlie doesn't run spacers. Charlie gets his fitment right the first time. So no, you don't need Loctite, and you actually should not use Loctite because it's just going to be a pain in the butt when you go to take those things off. Second question on the list, will spacers prevent rubbing? In most cases, spacers are going to actually make it worse. So a spacer is going to push your wheel further out, which means if it was rubbing on your control arms or your suspension components on the inside of your wheel, then yes, it would help because it won't rub on the inside anymore. However, by pushing that wheel further out, you're now increasing the turning radius, which means it's going to probably hit on your front bumper or the back corner of your fender, so that's going to lead to further clearance problems. So you can combat that by doing a NorCal or trimming the front bumper on your truck to make them fit. However, we get messages all the time that say, I want to run 20x12 -44s on my Chevy 1500 with 33s. Will it fit? The short answer is no, not on stock suspension. So then people will ask, well, what if I add a 2-inch spacer? Will that help? It's a common misconception. That's actually going to make it much worse because again, you're sticking that wheel even further out of the wheel well, which is going to not allow you to turn completely. Another question we get asked all the time is, I want to add spacers to get more offset. Can I do that? In short, the answer is no, because the spacer won't actually add any offset to your wheels or add negative offset if you're trying to stick out further. So if you have a wheel with a negative 44 offset and you add 2-inch spacers, the wheel itself still has that negative 44 offset. However, it's sticking out 2 inches further. It's just simple math if you want to try to figure out how much further your wheels are going to stick out. Wherever they are now, whatever size spacer you buy, that's how much further they're going out. Now, people are asking this question, I think, because they want that deep dish, that big lip look. And they'll find a wheel like a 20x9 that somebody says fits on whatever application they're looking for. And then they want to know, well, can I add spacers to change the offset? It's not a multi-piece wheel, so you're not able to change the offset once you purchase the wheels. Adding the 2-inch spacer will stick the wheel further out. However, you're still gonna have the same size lip as any other 9-wide. So you'd be talking maybe like 1.5 inches or 2 inches as compared to a 12-wide negative 44, which is gonna get you closer to 5 or 5.5 inches of lip. Another common question we get asked all the time is, do I need an alignment after adding spacers? And if you're talking about wheel spacers, the answer is no, because you really only need an alignment anytime you're affecting suspension geometry. So if you were adding a leveling kit or a lift kit, which has a strut spacer, that's going to affect the suspension geometry. If you're adding a wheel spacer, it doesn't change your suspension at all, it just pushes that wheel further out, so an alignment is not necessary. This is a good one. So people ask, if I put a 3 or 4-inch spacer on my truck, will that be hard on my ball joints? And the answer is yes. However, it's not anything that's like crazy. You're not going to be replacing them every weekend. But just like adding a negative 76 or a negative 101 offset wheel is going to affect your ball joints negatively, adding that big of a spacer is going to also, because it's pushing that wheel, that rotating mass, so much further out, it does put more stress on your front end components. So keep that in mind when ordering spacers. Sometimes we'll get a message asking, how do I know if I'm getting 5 or 6? The reason why it says 5 or 6 is just for the pricing, because it costs the same to make a 6 lug as it does to make a 5 lug, as long as it's the same size and everything like that, as far as you're getting a 2-inch spacer. So the 5 and 6 is just for pricing, and then the 8 lug is a different price because it takes more material to obviously make a larger spacer. So each spacer is made to order, so whatever you put in as far as your vehicle and your wheel, that's the specific spacer you're going to get. Another common question is, what is hub-centric and is it important? So I'm going to use this spacer to demonstrate because it's the easiest to see. A hub-centric spacer is designed perfectly to match your wheel and your vehicle. So the inside diameter on this side, the part that bolts up to your truck, is going to fit the hub of your truck perfectly. If you have a 72.6 millimeter hub, this is 72.6 millimeters exactly. They're machined for your vehicle. If your wheel has a larger diameter hub bore, like I said, this was 72.6, so say that's 75. This piece, the outer diameter of the outside of the spacer, which would bolt to your wheel, is going to be that 75 millimeters, so that everything sits perfectly flush and perfectly tight in there, so that you don't have any gaps and there's no possibility of mounting this, so it's shifted one way or another. It's going to be perfectly centered. That is what a hub-centric ring does. So last on our list is, when do I need spacers? Now, there's not really any situation where you absolutely have to have spacers. They're not required to install a lift kit. They're not really required to install wheels. But there are certain situations in which adding a spacer will help. So oftentimes, if people are trying to run their factory wheels, like a factory 20-inch wheel, and they have a lift kit, because that factory wheel has such a high positive offset and is so far inside the fender, if you put a bigger tire on there, there's a chance that that could rub on your suspension components and your upper and lower control arms. So that's where adding a spacer to push that wheel out a little bit would help. Now, I'm not saying you have to go crazy and add a 4-inch spacer. Sometimes just like a 3/8 spacer is just enough to push that away. So it's really easy to measure. If you take your truck to full crank, you'll be able to turn it back and see how far out you need to go. Just take that distance, you can even estimate it, and then you want at least that big of a spacer to push that wheel further out so you're not rubbing on the inside components. The other time where spacers become a necessity is for brake clearance. So depending on the offset or the style of the wheel, like the thickness of the spoke sometimes will affect this. And if you're ordering like a 17 or a 16, is something smaller that's not going to clear your brakes. By adding a spacer, you're able to push that further out, and then those spokes are allowed to rotate around the brake caliper rather than hitting it. So that about wraps it up for this video. If you guys have any other questions on spacers or any other products at all, we're probably going to keep these rolling, so just drop them in the comments below or shoot us a message and we'll be happy to answer your questions. Peace.